This is KM Wyland, and you are listening to the 366th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. It's funny to me how the ups and downs of the writing mindset work. Honestly, now that I've been on this journey for more than half my life, I think I can time the vagaries of my own opinions about my writing down to specific dates. For example, after I've finished a story and sent it to the first round of beta readers, I usually spend that intervening 6 months or so feeling super confident and happy about my latest creation and my abilities as a writer in general. Then, in the split second after I hear back from those betas, dark magic happens and I suddenly feel like I was totally deluded about the story and that I must, of course, be in general a total fraud in thinking I'm a good writer. And the funny part is that this is the exact pattern that happens whether or not my betas come back with huge criticisms. My historical superhero work in progress, Wayfarer, came back from the first round betas at the end of last month. And they were both extremely encouraging about it, one of them even saying they thought it was my best yet. Did that stop the crash afterwards? Nope. Which leads me to the reasonably encouraging realization of something I've always known, which is how you feel about a story at any given moment has nothing to do with its true worth. Just keep plugging along, trusting the process, putting one word in front of another, and before you know it, you'll turn the corner and think you're awesome again. But just don't let it go to your head. The latest post on my blog is how to tell if your antagonist is taking over your story. Next to your protagonist, your antagonist is your most important character. But beware lest you discover your antagonist is taking over your story. To read the post, visit my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled A New Way to Think About Scene Structure. Stories live and die on their scene structure. A great plot, even a well-structured great plot, won't be able to stand if its individual scenes are floundering with no clear sense of purpose and direction in the overall plot. Dwight V. Swain engineered the classic approach to scene structure, which breaks down each scene into integers of action and reaction, or as Swain calls them, scene and sequel. Each of those halves is then broken down further into 3 parts each. Scene has goal, conflict, and disaster. Sequel has reaction, dilemma, and decision. And this approach creates a solid chain of cause and effect that ensures each piece is integral in driving your overall plot forward. But it's not the only way to think about scene structure. Today I'm going to show you a secondary scene structure tool you can bring in as a support for Swain's comprehensive but occasionally mechanical overview of your story's most fundamental building blocks. So, there I was, sitting outside at my writing table, before the weather got too cold, of course, working on my scene outline for my Portal Fantasy sequel, Dreambreaker. As always, when mapping out scenes, I was paying strict attention to the 6 parts of Swain's scene structure. The protagonist's goal must, of course, be obstructed by pertinent conflict, which must then lead to a directly related scene outcome or disaster. Everything's connected in a beautiful, straight line. Except for when it's not. In the helter-skelter of real-time plots, in which you've likely got 2 or 3 different aspects of conflict all happening concurrently, it can be incredibly easy to fumble the continuity of a scene, despite the fabulous tools offered by Swain's method. As I mentally worked through one such complicated scene, I caught myself pondering, what question is this scene asking? Boom! I immediately sat back and realized this idea had given me the ability to look at each scene through an entirely different perspective. One of the easiest ways to make sure any scene's opening gambit is a direct line leading through the intermediary chaos of any number of conflicts straight to a pertinent scene climax is, you guessed it, to make sure the question raised in the scene's beginning is the same question that finds an answer in the scene's end. This whole concept was reinforced in Paula Munier's fantastic new book, The Writer's Guide to Beginnings, about which I'm still a little giddy over getting to write a cover blurb for, in which she refers to scene-level questions as meso-questions, to distinguish them from macro-level plot questions and micro-level questions that appear anywhere and everywhere in the narrative. She suggests, when you make your scene list, identify the meso-question for each scene. This will help you remember what each scene is all about and what you need to accomplish in that scene. On one level, we might posit that a story itself is, in fact, a question. And generally, this question is what's going to happen. When this question finds its definitive answer in the story's climax, the story is then over. That same pattern is repeated on a smaller level in every scene. The question you need to be asking at the beginning of every scene is what's going to happen. But of course, to be useful, you must then refine this question into something unique to each specific scene. For example, if we look at some of these scenes in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, we find these obvious scene questions. Will Mr. Bennet introduce himself to the eligible Mr. Bingley? Will Elizabeth see Mr. Darcy when she visits the Pemberley estate? Will Elizabeth cave to Lady Catherine's insulting demands that she refuse Mr. Darcy's hand? At first glance, all of these questions may seem to be just general queries within the narrative, but not so. A closer look at this familiar story shows us that each of these questions is pertinent to driving a very specific scene. Even when the protagonist and or the readers are not immediately aware of the specific nature of the question, once we reach the scene's answer, we can identify what question was driving the scene from the very start. When using Swain's approach to structure, you can begin planning a scene by either identifying its goal and following it through to its conclusion, or by choosing the scene outcome/disaster you want to create, and then forming the correct goal to lead the character to this ending. Same goes when using questions and answers to frame your scene structure. You can begin with either the question or the answer. Usually the answer will be yes or no. Either the character gets what he wants or he doesn't. In Pride and Prejudice, the previous scene questions find corresponding scene answers. Yes, Mr. Bennet introduced himself to the eligible Mr. Bingley on his daughter's account. Yes, Mr. Darcy well returned to find Elizabeth visiting his Pemberley estate. And no, Elizabeth will not cave to Lady Catherine's insulting demands that she refuse Mr. Darcy's hand. This will then raise the secondary question, how did the character reach his goal? Or how was the character blocked from reaching his goal? For example, Mr. Bennet anticipated his wife's harangue and visited Mr. Bingley before she could raise the subject. Just as Elizabeth is about to escape the premises of Pemberley with her aunt and uncle, she is surprised by Mr. Darcy's return. And Elizabeth refuses to give Lady Catherine her promise that she will not marry her nephew, and in so doing, discovers her love for him. So each part corresponds to Swain's structure. The question reveals the goal, the how reveals the conflict, and the answer reveals the outcome. Now, this is not a competing system to Swain's, but rather a bolstering one. Swain's scene structure is scene structure. But looking at it from a slightly different angle is helpful in stripping scenes down to their bare facts, which then allows you to verify a single, solid, cohesive through line in each scene. As you're working through these 6 parts of Swain's structure for each of your scenes, take an extra moment to also evaluate the scene through the lens of question and answer. This is a remarkably easy way to streamline scenes and keep them firmly on track, no matter how many layers of subplot conflict you have running through any given spot in your story. And as a total bonus, it also gives you a ready-made hook for the beginning of each scene. The hook itself is nothing more or less than a question. Pique your reader's curiosity with this scene-driving question, and you'll pull them right through to the end of the scene, and hopefully into the next one as well. This does not mean you must always state the scene question explicitly. Austen never outright says, "Was Elizabeth about to give in to Lady Catherine's bullying?" Usually your best approach is to allow each scene's question to arise from the subtext of the character's goals and the obstacles they meet along the way. The very simplicity of this approach to scene structure makes it invaluable in cutting through the inevitable clutter while plotting a book. Use this question and answer approach to scene structure to immediately discover the heart of each scene, allowing yourself to then move on to the more complex issues of layering the blow-by-blow of the narrative itself. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.